Welcome to the Plant Medicine Summit, where leading ecological experts, health practitioners, and educators are sharing essential practices for revitalizing your health through medicinal herbs, flowers, and essential oils. Share this powerful event with your friends and family and join in our conversation on Facebook at the Shift Network. And now your host, David Crow, founder of Floracopia.
Welcome to everyone. This is David Crow, your host of the Plant Medicine Summit, where we are exploring the many diverse ways that medicinal plants can be of great assistance for healing body, mind, spirit, families, communities, and ecosystems as well. So in this segment, I'm very pleased to present a gentleman that I have the highest regard for, an educator who will inform us in a lot of detail, I'm sure, about a very important plant that has been used for a very long time in traditional culture. Dr. Christopher Hobbs is a fourth-generation herbalist, a research scientist, a UC Berkeley graduate with a Ph.D. in integrative biology, which includes medical ethnobotany, medicinal plant chemistry, and related fields. So, Chris, welcome.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
So it's always a pleasure to listen to your teachings, and I know that you have a lot of information to share with us in a short time, so I'm just going to go ahead and open it up very briefly here and turn it back to you. We're going to be talking about the many very interesting aspects of kava-kava. So why is kava-kava so important in the traditional South Pacific cultures? And what is some of its history and use to get us going here?
Well, that's a good place to start. Kava is also called awa, or kava-kava, as you mentioned. And its Latin name, or its official scientific name, is Piper methysticum. So interestingly, it is related to another piper that we all know well, Piper nigrum, which is black pepper. So because of that, it kind of has a spicy, biting flavor, and when you have a drink of it or chew a little bit of the root, you can feel the pungency of it, but also it causes kind of a mild numbing effect, which is very characteristic of the herb. Now, its background, probably it evolved or arose in Papua New Guinea, that area, and then from there it was brought over early on by early peoples, native peoples. We don't know exactly how long ago, but it's been many, many, many centuries. I think probably there were people in the South Pacific Islands maybe 14,000 years ago, maybe longer, mainly from Asia. So when the peoples got there, they started experimenting with the plants, and this is a very unique plant. It grows nowhere else other than in the South Pacific. And so they started experimenting and found awa, and they started chewing it, I guess, and drinking it and preparing it, and found that it has a number of amazing characteristics which are quite uncommon in the plant kingdom. Namely, it produces an amazing euphoric effect. And by euphoria, I mean, I don't know if, I guess euphoria is a word that could be fairly pejorative and maybe have a different meaning for different people, but typically euphoria means that it promotes a really, really good mood, and you feel like, wow, everything is just great, and no matter what the situation, it's just everything is perfect right where you are, and you just have a very wonderful and pleasant feeling about things. And that's what I've noticed in my drinking of kava and the use of kava. But in the traditional cultures, it started from probably the area of Papua New Guinea, and then we think that the modern use now in cultures, and probably the best cultivars, come from an island called Vanuatu, which is an island that's just north of Papua New Guinea and that area. So that's probably one of the starting places for it culturally. And it quickly became very culturally important in the sense that people, well, when you drink kava, it promotes not only nice euphoria, but it also promotes kind of a social feeling where you feel like talking and conversing and having a good time, laughing, and relaxation. So social interactions, of course, are wonderful, but they can be stressful if there are negative things going on, or say a family or a village, there's some politics or something. But kava tends to relax people and make them amenable to conversation and to working things out. So I think that's probably why it really did get into the culture and was so highly revered. Now, in traditional cultures, kava is usually much more accessible to men than it is to women. Nowadays, it's not as true. And I go into the local kava bar here, I see just as many women as men imbibing kava and enjoying it. But in those days, and I think probably in traditional cultures still, in the South Pacific, it's a little bit more available to men and more widely used by men in social situations.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
well, that's an interesting comment you just made about you go into your local kava bar. Where are you, and where can we find a local kava bar?
Well, that would be good. I think about 3 years ago, a couple of ethnobotanists in the area in which I live, which is near Sacramento, California, and you might call it the Greater Bay Area. A couple of ethnobotanists, studied kava and studied other psychoactive plants around the world, and then they decided that kava was so special and so popular in the Sacramento area because there's a large South Pacific Islander population in near Sacramento, Rancho Cordova more specifically. And so they opened the first kava bar, I guess around 5 years ago, something like that. And then they opened another one in Davis, which is nearby. And that's where I lived for the last 14 years, was Davis, California, where the university is. So I went in there and someone said, well, did you know there's a kava bar in town? This was probably 3 years ago. And I was blown away because kava is well known to herbalists, and we use it in social situations and so forth, and had for quite a few years, off and on. But just to have a kava bar where you could go in like you would find in the South Pacific, because there are kava bars in the South Pacific, and just go in and sit down at the bar, and it has kind of a South Pacific Islander feeling, the way that they do it with shells and stuff up on the wall. And by the way, it's really interesting. They have TV monitors up next to the bar where they're showing almost nonstop surfing videos, which kind of give you a sense of, the South Pacific Islands. I love watching surfing videos, especially after drinking kava. So you go in and you just ask for a high tide or a low tide. In other words, a full shell or maybe a half shell. And by shell, I mean a coconut shell. And that's how it's typically consumed, is in coconut shells. So they blend it up, and you go in and you can get a high tide or a low tide. They put pineapple in it if you want. They put various flavorings because I'm an herbalist and I just take it straight up. But many people want flavoring or sweetness added to it because it is kind of an acquired taste. It's very strong, rooty, earthy, spicy flavor, and not everybody is going to be into it right away. But once you feel the effects, I think it's going to certainly, you're more likely to go in a second and third time and make it a regular habit even. So it's just really got me going on it.
Nice. Well, it's really nice to hear that kava has appeared in an ethnobotanically challenged community such as Davis, California. So that's wonderful progress. I'm sure that it's having a positive impact on the culture there. And before we close this conversation, I would certainly like to ask what you would think of the potential impact if kava was to become very widespread in our culture. But before we get to that, maybe we should talk a bit about what some of the scientific research is that's coming out and how it's being incorporated on a therapeutic basis in the clinic. We know, obviously, that in the traditional culture, they used it ritualistically, ceremonially, but it also was used as a great medicine. So what is science telling us now about how it can be used clinically?
Yes, and there are some good studies. You'd be surprised at the volume and the amount of research that has been performed primarily in Germany, which is a good thing because Germany has really good instrumentation. They're very careful pharmacologists. So they've done some excellent studies on kava. And so what you can find if you look on, and I always recommend that people look for themselves on PubMed.gov, PubMed, PubMed.gov.gov. And that's a wonderful site. It's the world's largest medical database, and you can look up more studies on kava and really read the abstracts and look at the primary research directly. Remember that there's a lot of secondary information on the web, so if you look up kava, you might get different opinions, and people might be selling a kava product. So go to the source, go to PubMed.gov, and really read it for yourself. But I've looked at it extensively, and what I can tell you is that the studies are focused on a couple of main areas, and the first is insomnia, and the second is anxiety. So anxiety and nervousness is a big problem everywhere and at times. So that's one reason why kava has been a popular medicine as well. And if you look at the clinical studies, there are actually 10 meta-analyses, which means researchers have reviewed all the studies that have been published on kava and then really done statistical magic to determine, is it really effective or is it not effective based on, say, 20 studies. And so they read over and have to compensate for the differing methodologies and so forth. But it turns out that the randomized double-blind study, the most current one, there are 10 meta-analyses that have been published, and the most current one, 2010, by Faustino et al., showed that kava presented an unequivocal anxiolytic effect. So in other words, unequivocally, it had the effect of relaxing people and lessening symptoms of anxiety or nervousness. So that's really good. And it's been very popular in Germany, I think, because of these clinical trials, which have shown it to be a very effective medicine. Now, the other beautiful thing about this study is that when they compare it with oxazepam or some of the other anxiolytics, they find that it has a lot less side effects and that it works just about as well. And so that's pretty amazing when you really think about it, that a natural medicine like kava, traditional medicine, can work just as well as the comparable drugs with a lot less side effects. The other thing, so that, and then sleep. Now, the sleep aspect of it, does it promote good sleep? Does it help a person sleep if they are having trouble or if they're feeling anxious? Yes, it can help with sleep, and the research shows that it can have some benefits. But of course, sleep is a lot more difficult because sleeping problems can come from a variety of sources, not just feeling anxious or having tight muscles. It could be a lot of things. It could be light pollution or noise or other things. Just feeling uncomfortable in your digestive tract, for instance, or getting older. But some positive research has been done to show that kava can help with certain cases of insomnia, especially if you can't sleep well because you're feeling anxious or because your muscles are tight, because kava can act as a muscle relaxant. So it's like the herbal muscle relaxant, you might say. Now, the other traditional use of kava that's very widespread is infection and inflammation of the genitourinary tract. So in other words, for urinary tract infections, for irritable, say, pain and irritation when you urinate, things like that, that it can provide pain relief, and it also is thought to act as a tonic. So in other words, if you're and I've noticed this in my clinical practice, that if a person has trouble urinating freely, or if it's slightly painful upon urination, or they have to get up a lot at night, that it can provide some relief. Now, the science on that is kind of equivocal. There have been some studies that show a benefit and other studies that don't show a particular benefit. So we need more studies on that, but that is a primary traditional use along with insomnia and anxiety. Now,
thank you. Go ahead.
That's pretty much some. I think one of the most important aspects that I want to make sure to mention. Oh, and then but let me just give you the details on one clinical study, the most current clinical study, Savage et al. It's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, 18-week study. So it's a controlled trial with 210 currently anxious participants with diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder. And they found that kava, the group getting the kava versus the placebo, had statistically significant benefits of relaxation and calm over the placebo. And the authors conclude that it should be a first-line therapy for generalized anxiety disorder. So that's the most current clinical study, and that's quite a positive study for kava. Now, one of the most important things about kava is what form do you take kava in? We've kind of looked at the science. So in other words, it does have science for anxiety and some for insomnia, very solid for anxiety and nervousness. But how do you capture that benefit? Do you just go to the store and buy, say, a bottle of pills, or is there a better way? Now, there are lots of kava products out there in the marketplace, but what I can tell you is some of them can be effective. I don't really tend to recommend ones that are highly purified. I tend to recommend ones that are either freeze-dried root and rhizome and finely powdered, or very low extract, to say a 5-to-1, no more than a 5-to-1. You can get some extracts that they say have 80% or 85% kava lactones, which are considered to be among the most important active ingredients. I don't really agree on using those highly purified ones, which have been associated with some side effects, first of all, and secondly, I just don't think they work as well. That's based on my clinical experience, certainly, and personal experience. So what is the best way to imbibe kava for its benefits? The best way is traditional use, and that's the way it's been used probably for, I don't know, it could be 2,000 or 3,000 years or more. So what you do is you buy kava powder. So you can go into almost any herb shop and you can buy kava powder from the rhizome and roots, finely powdered. And then, we used to make a tea out of the roots and rhizomes, which can be effective. It's okay. But it certainly isn't as effective as using the traditional method, which is basically taking the powder, so you could get the root pieces and you could powder it up yourself in a coffee grinder or something, or you could buy a powder, because a number of companies do sell powders, and you can buy those online directly from the source in Polynesia. But what you do is you take the powder and you put for one person, you would take a couple of, say, level tablespoons would be a good strong dose. You could use 1 tablespoon for just a moderate dose, and you put it into tap water or just purified water, as warm as you can make it without still having to pull your finger out really right away. So in other words, it should be quite warm but not boiling hot. Then you just stir the kava into that liquid there, and then you can filter it with a coffee. Oh, you should let it steep for, say, 10 minutes or so, stirring, and then you could just filter it through a coffee filter and drink it. On the other hand, the way I do it and the way most people do it, if they're used to using kava, is you get a nut seed milk bag, to make like almond milk. It's a very fine mesh bag that has a drawstring on the top. You can get it at a lot of health food stores. And you put your couple of tablespoons of kava powder into the nut milk bag, and then you dip it into the hot water in a say measuring cup or jar, and then you dip it up and down like you're making a cup of tea almost. And then after it cools down enough, you squeeze and milk the bag with the powder in it. So you're kind of kneading it, you're milking it, you're causing the liquid to go in and out of the powder, and then say do that for 2 or 3 minutes, and then squeeze all the liquid that you can out of the powder, and then you have a kind of a cloudy brown liquid that smells like kava, and it should have kind of a mild numbing effect when you drink it. Then you drink that, and typically people drink it in one draught, or they drink it quickly, and you might say bula bula or something like that. So there are some traditional phrases that people say when they're drinking it, just in a celebratory fashion, like saying gone by, in other words, skull or something like that. So they say bula bula or just bula, and then they drink it down in one draught. Now you can sip it, but that doesn't provide quite the same strength of effect. So if you drink it fairly quickly, say within a minute or two, you will get the strongest effect, and then you should start feeling a euphoric effect. I would say within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you can start feeling a euphoric effect. Now, the best kava is going to give you a very strong euphoric effect, so you just feel like, oh, this is absolutely wonderful. And then that lasts typically for about a half an hour, and then slowly kind of goes into a feeling of relaxation and ease, you might say. So your body relaxes, your mind relaxes, and it just leaves you with a pleasant feeling. So that's pretty much it. How to make it at home, or how to make it when you get the powder. You can take capsules from a product and just open up the capsules and put it into hot water again, and then stir it for a few minutes, and then filter it. But what I think is better, not to take the powder. So that's why I say squeeze it out, the liquid, hot water, or make a tea and strain it or whatever, because the fiber tends to upset the stomach if you drink too much of the actual kava fiber. But all the active ingredients are water soluble, so that you can extract them with the methods that I'm mentioning. And I'll say one more thing about that. Sometimes you won't feel a really beautiful euphoric effect, and you'll just get the relaxation, and that's because of the strain of the kava. There are many strains of kava, and some strains are better than than others. You'll see strains from Fiji, from Vanuatu, I mentioned, from Solomon Islands, from Samoa, from Hawaii, and other places, even Papua New Guinea. So you see different strains that people are growing in those islands, and then they're selling them worldwide now. There's a huge demand for kava, and farmers are scrambling to grow more. The world is just asking for more kava, and that's where the source is the South Pacific Islands. But I will say that Vanuatu is typically the very best. So if you're looking for the best kava, it's typically going to be a Vanuatu cultivar. And that's where I've noticed the best effects from over the years.
Nice. Thank you. Excellent overview. Now let's talk about a clinical complexity here, because we know as researchers, educators, clinicians, that there has been controversy around the use of kava over the years because it has been associated, correctly or not, with liver damage or potential liver damage. And we also know that if people drink too much, that you can get a hangover, and so it can be hard on your system. And so I would like to ask the specific question here on behalf of those who are listening to your report about how effective it is for sleep and for anxiety. And I would like to say, okay, I am a person who has anxiety, and I am on a anxiolytic medication. Is it safe for me to just drink kava if I am on one of these medications? Is it safe for me to drink kava if I need to take a sleep medication at night? And if I am on any or both of these types of medications, are there contraindications? Or how would you suggest approaching using kava as complementary or alternative treatment?
That's very important, and I'm certainly glad that you brought up the safety issues, because about, 14, 15 years ago in Germany, there was a cluster of people who had hepatotoxicity or symptoms of hepatotoxicity, and some very seriously, and it was associated with the use of kava. However, since then, and the German government pulled the licenses and were not allowing companies to sell it in Germany. Now, what happened next was that over about 10 years, many researchers around the world tried to demonstrate the hepatotoxicity of kava without success. So what we know about kava is kava itself does not have hepatotoxicity per se. Now, if a person, however, it does, like a lot of herbs or some herbs, it does have an effect on liver enzyme, metabolism of drugs and other things. So what it means is some people also have idiosyncratic reactions. In other words, the rare person might just be sensitive to kava, so it might be kind of an allergic reaction. It doesn't happen too often, but it could happen. Secondly, if you're on a lot of medications that place a stress on the liver, like aspirin even, or acetaminophen, which are hepatotoxic in and of themselves, and you're also adding kava, and you're a person who might be susceptible, then okay, that could also be a problem. So to your point, if a person is on anxiolytic drugs, like the one that I mentioned, pharmaceutical, to reduce anxiety, it's best to talk with your physician. It's best to talk with especially I would recommend like a naturopathic physician who really know what they were doing, had a lot of experience, or an herbalist who really knew what they were doing, and working in conjunction, say, with a physician. Then I would tend to recommend using some caution. If you're already on medications, obviously, they could work synergistically together to create a problem. So then what happened next was about 2 or 3 years ago, it turns out that there was some type of collusion. There was some type of a planned, you might say, study or this cluster of hepatotoxicity, in other words, might have been planned or overblown or orchestrated in some way by pharmaceutical companies. So this came out behind the scenes, and then it also, after 12 years or so of trying to demonstrate hepatotoxicity for kava, and not being able to find any really per se directly using kava, and especially the traditional method is what should be added to that, and not those highly purified extracts. And also they found that maybe the stem was involved and maybe solvents were involved that were harsh solvents. So that's why I say only use the water-based extracts or powder, or make your own water-based extracts. That's when you're going to have the safest experience with the least amount of side effects. But it turns out that Germany did reinstate the licensing for kava products based on the tremendous amount of effort and research that has gone into looking at the potential hepatotoxicity of kava. Now, there's one other safety issue that should be addressed, and that is driving under the influence of kava, which is pretty interesting. So some people report that a couple of states have passed laws that you cannot drive under the influence of kava because it could impair driving. So there is a clinical study on driving impairment, and that was Saris et al., 2013. And they studied driving impairment of 22 adults taking 180 milligrams of kava lactones, and that's a pretty strong dose. And they concluded that it did not impair driving ability, whereas 30 milligrams of oxazepam shows some impairment. So that was one clinical study that showed that likely it is not going to cause any impairment of driving. Still, it's always a good idea to be careful with driving, especially if you've imbibed a lot of kava. Now, the other thing is don't drink kava, particularly with alcohol. I've seen it with my own eyes, someone just falling down basically and losing their muscle control after drinking 3 or 4 beers and then imbibing a lot of really highly purified kava. They had that effect of, just not being able to walk or stand up for a while. Everything was fine later, but again, don't mix kava and alcohol particularly. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, very good, very helpful. So I know that you are an experienced user. What would you report as far as how you feel the next day after heavy consumption or a particularly euphoric experience?
Well, that certainly is a good one, and I know a lot about that because I've tried all the different cultivars. I've tried drinking. I'm usually pretty moderate. I might have 1 shell or 2 shells at most. I know that if I drink more than 2 shells, high tides for me, which would mean about, say, 2 tablespoons of the powder, and then make it, as I suggested, the traditional method, and then drink that down, and then maybe add a little bit more, maybe a half teaspoon or teaspoon to the old batch, and then brew it again and drink another cup. If I do that much kava on an empty stomach, and I have to mention that, if you want the euphoric effect, it has to be on an empty stomach. You cannot have food and experience that. So eating is going to immediately bring you down. In other words, it's going to make it so that you just feel relaxed, but you're not going to have the psychogenic properties. So what I found is that, just be moderate. 1 drink, maybe a couple high tides at maximum, stretched out over a couple of hours. You typically will not feel any drowsiness or if you're feeling like you get up in the morning and you just feel like, oh, what hit me, or I'm feeling really drowsy or drugged, you won't have that feeling. In fact, you probably won't even remember that you had kava the night before. But there's one caveat with that, and that is there are 2 types of kava. There is noble kava, N-O-B-L-E, and there is a 2-day kava, T-U-D-A-Y. So 2-day kava is not supposed to be sold from the South Pacific to other countries because, as its name suggests, the effects last for 2 days. And the second day is not pleasant. I've had 2-day kava a couple of times when I thought I was getting noble kava, and I just felt lousy the next morning. I was still drugged feeling. In fact, I've talked with people on some types of kava that they could feel it all the next day. And this is more of the kava that I got a bag of kava that was grown in Papua New Guinea, the original one, supposedly. It's a different species, not Piper methysticum. And that lasted for 2 days, and I did not enjoy the second day. So make sure you're getting a noble type of kava. If you're getting it from Vanuatu or Hawaii is one of my favorites, then you can be sure that it's probably going to be a noble kava. And if you drink it, the first time you drink it, just drink, 1 shell or 1 tablespoon of it, and then see how you feel the next day. So go with any herbal, remedy or herbal drink. Make sure you start out slowly and just check for individual sensitivity. If you're unhealthy or you're on pharmaceuticals, then I would prefer more caution. I would recommend more caution. And just go into it slowly with exploration. And then once you find out, okay, no problems, I feel good the next morning, don't feel drowsy or drugged or anything, then you can experiment with maybe 2 tablespoons. But if you drink too much of it, a couple of times I had maybe too much kava, and it isn't a pleasant feeling if you drink too much of it. I mean, it's not terrible, it's not dangerous or anything, but I just felt drugged. I felt a little bit disoriented, dizzy, and so forth. So just, be moderate. And then lastly, is it habituating? That's always another really interesting question. And I would say that the feeling of euphoria can be habituating. Like anything that you might have, that provides a sense of euphoria, you're going to want to take it again, and you look forward to it. So you might think, oh boy, it's almost 6 o'clock, I'm going to have a cup of kava. Or you might think, oh, my kid's been a real pain today, I'm really stressed, I got to go get some kava. Well, I don't see any problem with that, but if you're starting to think about the kava, part of the day, you're thinking, oh, I can hardly wait till I can have some kava, that wonderful effect, then I would say that, yes, it is possible to become psychologically dependent on it. And people do, like in certain areas of the South Pacific, people do. But that's why there's very set traditional uses and rituals, because that prevents people from overdoing it. And I could tell more stories about that, but it's really true that that's why those rituals and ceremonies are in place, because people use it in the correct way and they don't abuse it. But our culture, we could abuse it. I've seen people have 4 or 5 shells of kava, and it's not going to be that pleasant. So, yeah, I would just say be moderate.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you. Okay, we are approaching the end of our time here, unfortunately. I just want to mention that everybody can listen to the replay by purchasing the upgrade package, which is at plantmedicinesummit.com/upgrade, plantmedicinesummit.com/upgrade. And you can also get the transcripts with that upgrade package. And the transcripts will have all of the information, specifically information that you might not have caught the first time around, like that detailed description of how to prepare the kava, the exact percentages and recipes. So check that out. And Chris, thank you so much for your presentation up to now. And I'll just turn it back to you for any closing thoughts, any last important pieces of information, or perhaps you'd like to share any ideas that may have crossed your mind as you've been studying this particular subject as an ethnobotanist and a researcher, and maybe thinking about what kind of effect could this have if this was a plant that was widely adopted by the modern world. It seems like the modern world is asking for it. I'm wondering if you've thought about the potential impact of people in the United States bringing kava into our culture more.
Something I've thought a lot about, and you're right, the world is asking for it, but as usual, we have to be careful, but we can discuss that. I think that's a very important question.
Good. So what are some of your thoughts on it?
I think it could be a problem because we have several kava bars in the area, but on the positive side, they started the kava bar in the first place in Davis because they wanted students to be able to go to a place where there wasn't alcohol being served and be able to congregate and socialize, and kava really promotes that kind of environment and atmosphere. So that's been really great. And I will admit that the environment in the Davis and Rancho Cordova shops is really nice. I mean, it's very calm, relaxed. People are not, rowdy or getting drunk or anything like that. They're imbibing kava and they're socializing. They're discussing things. They're having a good time, but it doesn't have kind of the dark side so much as alcohol might have. So that's the positive side. But on the other side, there are many things that people can become addicted to and dependent on. And I think as long as I think some people are more likely, and this has been my experience, some people are more likely to want to use it daily or even multiple times daily than others. Obviously, some people, probably most people, will just take it as it is. They'll just drink it and enjoy it in the setting of the bar, or they might get a bag and bring it home, or order a bag and make it at home for social occasions. And they might drink some when they're stressed out or they have trouble sleeping. That's fine. But if you're just like looking forward to it and drinking it daily and drinking multiple cups daily, that's too much. And that it will affect you. It will make you feel groggy. It will lead to, I don't know, I've experienced when I've used it daily for, say, a week or something, I've noticed that I lose a step. I just feel more sluggish, more groggy, not quite up to par. And so I think overusing it and using it daily can be a problem. And when it's offered worldwide, I mean, we're going to need more growers, for one thing. Turns out that in Vanuatu, I understand from very good sources that people are carrying guns around, that there are criminal elements involved, because anytime there's lots of money involved and there's a high demand for something, then there's always going to be that type of thing going on. Even with ginseng, there's that going on, is that people will carry guns and they're buying up whole crops and things like that. But the ethnobotanist that I spoke of that started the kava bar told me that he's been talking with the Vanuatu growers and saying, I need more kava from you. You've got the best kava, and we're selling it like crazy, and I'm willing to buy to guarantee that I will buy a certain amount, whatever it is, ton or whatever, and if you'll just grow more, I'll take all you can get. And they'll just tell him, no, we don't want to grow more. We're happy with the way it is. We enjoy our free time. We're not entrepreneurs. I mean, this is the South Pacific Islands, after all. So they have their cultural way of using it, and they're relaxed. And I'm glad that they're saying that, and it's not going to impact their culture in a huge way. But yes, I would say that's the dark side, is where is all the kava going to come from? First of all, it has to grow in the tropics, and it could impact cultures. That's what's happened with cordyceps. It's really impacted the Tibetan, some parts of the Tibetan culture, and other herbs that become very, very popular. So we just have to worry about that, is that the supply and the demand, not overusing it, psychological dependence, and those types of things, if it becomes more widespread. Frankly, right now, I don't think it can, because the supply is fairly limited. So I think it's going to grow more organically, just based on the supply.
Yes. Well, thank you for your comments and insights. I've always had the hope that as the demand for natural medicine grew globally, that it would create more sustainability projects, sustainable cultivation projects, as opposed to destroying the rainforest, that we could find ways to produce sustainable crops in the forest instead. But in the transition, there are certainly a lot of political, economic complexities. So, Chris, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your valuable knowledge and your personal experience, and thank you also for the work that you've done for decades, enriching a lot of people with your education and knowledge. I just want to mention to our audience that it's not so common to be a fourth-generation herbalist in the Western tradition. It's more common in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. But to be a fourth-generation herbalist in the West is quite unique and rare. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks, David. I much appreciate it, and it's certainly my pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this segment of the Plant Medicine Summit, and join us for another one.
Thank you for joining us for the Plant Medicine Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To add this powerful collection of teachings to your personal library, visit plantmedicinsummit.com/upgrade. To learn more about our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for joining us to discover the curative and evolutionary powers of medicinal plants, and for sharing this life-changing information with your friends and family.